You've felt it your whole life. That subtle feeling that you don't fully belong anywhere. Not completely. Not in the groups you grew up with. Not in the world you live in now. Not even in conversations that are supposed to include you. You're there, but not quite part of it. And you've probably never fully explained it, because it's hard to explain something that doesn't have a clear shape. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's just always there, in the background. And if you've carried that feeling for years, there's a reason. It didn't come from nowhere. It was built, quietly, over time, in a very specific way. And once you understand how, that feeling stops being a mystery. But first, you need to understand what happened. It's 1979. You're 11 years old. There's a birthday party in the neighborhood. You're there. You've known these kids for years. You sit in the backyard. You eat cake. You laugh at the right moments. But something is slightly off. Not wrong, exactly. Just slightly out of sync. Like you're watching it as much as you're in it. Like there's a thin layer of glass between you and the room, and nobody notices. Because you're good at this. You've always been good at this. Being present without being fully there. Participating without fully attaching. You go home afterward, and you can't explain why it felt that way. You just know that it did, and that it always does. That feeling didn't start at that party. It started earlier, in the years when the world around you was quietly changing, and you were changing with it, without anyone explaining what was happening, because you grew up in between stability and change, between structure and chaos, between a world that still functioned one way and a world that suddenly didn't anymore. You weren't raised like the generation before you, but you don't recognize yourself in the generation after you either. You're somewhere in the middle, and the middle doesn't have a clear name. Nobody made a documentary about it. Nobody wrote the definitive story about what it felt like to grow up exactly when you did. The generation before you has their story. The generation after you has theirs. You have pieces of both, and nothing that's entirely yours. It's late afternoon. You're sitting in your room. The TV is on in the background. No one is really watching it. No one is really talking. The house is quiet, but not peaceful. Just empty. You don't think about it at the time. You just learn to fill the silence, and that becomes normal. Psychologists call this between-world conditioning. Growing up in a transitional period creates a specific kind of psychology. You learn to read multiple environments, to adapt to different rules, to understand different perspectives, but you never fully settle into one, because settling into one means letting go of the other, and some part of you never quite did that. Not because you couldn't, because you learned early that things don't stay fixed. So why attach completely to something that might shift? And this isn't just about social groups. It shows up in everything, in how you approach work, in how you handle relationships, in how you react when things get uncertain. You don't panic the way some people do, because uncertainty has always been your normal. You don't need constant reassurance, because reassurance was never guaranteed. You don't cling to how things used to be, because you watched things change before you were old enough to resist it. It's 1981. You're 13. Both parents work now. Not because anything dramatic happened, just because the world shifted. One income stopped being enough. Life became more complicated, and the house changed. Not dramatically, just quietly. Fewer people home when you got back from school. Fewer conversations about how the day went. More figuring things out on your own. More silence. And in that silence, you developed something. You learned to not need the conversation, to not expect someone to check in, to handle things yourself. You learned to make decisions without running them by anyone. You learned to process things alone because there was no one to process them with. You learned that your internal world was more reliable than the external one, because the external one kept changing, and you got good at it. Really good. But here's what happens when you spend years being good at not needing people. You stop expecting to be fully understood by them. You stop assuming that the room you're in is really for you. You stop waiting for the moment where you fully settle in, because that moment kept not arriving. So you adapted. You built a version of yourself that didn't depend on it. Psychologists call this adaptive detachment, the ability to function in environments without fully attaching to them. It looks like independence. It looks like confidence. It looks like someone who doesn't need much, but underneath, there's still that question, the one you rarely say out loud. Where do I actually belong? It's 2003. You're in your 30s. You're in a room with people. Work meeting, dinner, doesn't matter. You're engaged. You're saying the right things. You're good at this. You've always been good at this. Reading the room, knowing what to say, being present in a way that looks natural. And then someone says something, a shared memory, a reference, a moment that belongs to a specific group. The room lights up and you smile, but the smile is slightly separate because you recognize the moment, but you're not fully in it. You're one step back, watching it happen, even in your own life. And you've gotten so used to this that most of the time you don't even notice it anymore. You move between spaces, you understand different people, you can talk to almost anyone, but you rarely feel fully seen. Not completely. And that's not a personal failure, that's a structural result of how you grew up. Because while you were growing up, everything was changing. Families changed, work changed, expectations changed. The world became less stable, less predictable, less certain, and you were old enough to feel it, but too young to control it. So you adapted. You learned to fit where you could without ever fully settling in. And that creates something powerful. You become someone who can exist anywhere, but doesn't feel fully at home anywhere. Psychologists call this structural non-belonging. It's not about being unlikable. It's not about social anxiety. It's not about anything you did wrong. It's about being shaped in a way that makes full attachment feel slightly unsafe. Because you learned early that things shift. So you kept a little distance, not dramatically, just enough. And that system is still running. Even now, even when you don't notice it, you just feel the result. That thin layer of glass, that slight gap between you and the room, that feeling of watching your own life from one step back. But here's what that distance built. You don't need constant validation. You don't need a group to tell you who you are. You don't need labels to define you. You built something rarer than belonging, a self-defined identity, an internal sense of who you are that doesn't depend on being recognized. Most people never develop that. They need the group to tell them who they are. You learn to know without being told, because no one was telling you. You had to figure it out yourself. So if you've spent your life feeling like you don't fully belong anywhere, it's not because you failed. It's because you were never designed to fit into just one place. You were shaped between worlds. And people who grow up between worlds don't fully belong to either one. They create their own. That distance you feel was never a flaw. It was conditioning, an understanding that changes everything. Because once you see it clearly, that feeling stops being a wound and becomes information. You're not someone who failed to belong. You're someone who learned to stand without needing to. If this felt familiar, you're not the only one, and you never were.